Hey everybody, this is Isaac Wegner from HiddenAudiolog.com here with a kind of a feature I've been cooking up for a while here because it's something I've been really passionate about and had a really interesting experience with. This is a video and audio feature called Analyzing the Persona series in Reverse. Now what inspired this feature idea was specifically my experience with the Persona franchise. And this is the Shin Megami Tensei Persona franchise, or at least until 5, which dropped the Shin Megami Tensei name. The Atlas, Atlas is, I would say, probably biggest franchise at this point here. Kind of seeing how it got to here by examining all the other Persona games to see how they kind of all built upon each other and how new systems got built in synchronization, or like, just built up to the point that it is at this point. And this is gonna go by specifically analyzing the way that I played the games, which is basically in reverse. My first Persona game that I played was Persona 5, and it's a brilliant, fantastic game. Probably my game of the year, definitely my game of the year so far. We'll see how it measures up to the rest of the year, though. The rest of the year be kind of hard pressed to challenge it, honestly, looking at the lineup. But anything's possible. And after Persona 5, I wanted more. And so I went back and played Golden, Persona 4 Golden, and then after that I played through Persona 3 Portable, the emulated version that you can buy in the PlayStation Store on the Vita. And it was a really interesting way of actually, because playing a franchise, usually it's something where you build it up, or you've been playing with the franchise up until this point. It's like my experience with the Halo franchise, where I play Halo 1 and 2 and 3 and so on and so forth. But this is like I played the latest one, and I wanted more of this formula, and I wanted to see how we got here. And that's why I'm going to be kind of talking about them in the order that I played them, which is 5, 4 Golden, and Persona 3 Portable. The kind of the goals and objectives of this piece is to, again, examine how the franchise built up upon of each other, give a pretty deep analysis on each individual game, and to kind of come up with an order of things and how I feel like they stand with and against each other, and to kind of figure out what the future of the Persona franchise is after this. And that's actually a more interesting topic after some of the modern and most recent stuff that's come out about the Persona franchise, including some spin-off games and studio shakeups and stuff like that. So the one thing I will mention, a couple of things, I want to go over the structure of this video a little bit. There will be timestamps for each of the Persona games in the YouTube description here, and in the description, audio description. This will go up as a video and also as a podcast on HiddenAudiolog.com, which you'll be able to find both these things. But you're already listening to this, so you probably already know that. But again, check out HiddenAudiolog.com or YouTube.com/HiddenAudiolog. If you prefer to listen to a podcast version of this, because this might go on for a long time, I urge you to download the podcast version of this on our podcast channel. Again, you'll find that post on the website, and there'll be a link for it in the YouTube description. But if you're watching the video, there'll be timestamps that you can click on and just jump forward to the Persona game of your choice. The reason for this is in case you want to hear in the chronological order. I don't really want to get in your way of that, and I feel like this is the best way of going about that. As all these sections will be pretty self-contained, and only near the end will I start kind of bringing everything together and kind of saying, all right, how do these all stack upon each other? That's not necessarily 100% true. There will be a little bit crossover here and there, but there's a main section near the end where I'll be doing the majority of the heavy lifting there. Now specifically about the quality of the video. I'm kind of recording this in the dead of night a little bit. My voice isn't as loud as I would like even recording a podcast or anything like that. I'm being a little quiet, though this is like my comfortable normal talking voice, but it's not very showy or loud, so I do apologize if you have trouble hearing me. Got my Audacity recording this, got my OBS recording this to provide a backup version of this, and video in the background is not great. It's just me kind of playing through a New Game Plus version of Persona 5. By the time I actually got to recording footage of the video and getting the idea to do this feature, I had already finished 4 and 3, and those were both on the Vita. I have no fucking idea how to record footage from a Vita. I bet it's not easy, because it never is. Even the PS4 is kind of a nightmare to try to record footage on through like OBS or through my computer, with a capture card even. So it's not great footage. It's not gonna be very indicative. So when you're talking about, I'm talking about Persona 4, and it shows Persona 5 gameplay, it's not gonna be very well edited together in terms of like, oh, you know, common thing, you want to see the game that's being talked about. Sorry, that's not going to happen here, and it's not going to be very well edited, so it's not going to be nice cuts between that I typically do for like a video review or something like that. This is just going to be something where I'm just going to have this in the background so you can listen to it, or you watch this YouTube video, maybe watch a little bit of gameplay so you know what I'm talking about Persona 5. But again, if the quality of the video is kind of suspect for you in terms of as a viewing experience, again, I highly urge you to go download the MP3 version of this, which will be up on the website. Last kind of big news, not big news, but big topic to go over the structure of this video. There will be spoilers for every single game. My main objective is not to go super duper deep and kind of go over every single little plot point, but there'll be major stuff, because you need to talk about this when you're analyzing something. You need to be able to have a commonplace ground, say, all right, the line is drawn, as in there is no line drawn. Everything is open and up in the air to be able to be discussed. So if there's a game, it's like, oh, I haven't finished Persona 5 yet, or oh, I actually want to go back and play Golden, then you need to pause the video or use those timestamps to skip to the one that you don't care about being spoiled. The majority of the spoilers will be within the individual sections, and so that will be most of that stuff. And by the end, when I start wrapping things up and kind of ranking them together and then kind of comparing them on a case-by-case basis, most of the spoiler stuff is going to be skipped there. So you can also use those timestamps to just kind of get to the meat and potatoes if you don't want to hear analysis for the game that you're playing or want to play. Again, audio version at hiddenaudiolog.com. You're on the YouTube channel, but if you're listening to this in MP3 and you want to watch the version of this, or give me that nice view, or subscribe to it for any future video content, then I highly recommend to go to youtube.com/hiddenaudiolog. Again, so this stuff will be on the post on the website. So without any further ado, we should just get really stuck into it here with Persona 5. The last thing I'll mention real quick before we dive into this is that even though I've kind of explained how my play history of this game was, I had a very different history growing up with the Persona franchise, as in I never played any of them, as is kind of apparent at this point. I watch a lot of other people playing it. Persona 3 was a game that I, like, when I was a kid, I really wanted to play, but it was like a highly rated game it was like a highly rated PS2 game, but I didn't really have the time to play launch JRPGs like that. I didn't have the money. I didn't grow up in, you know, I had to be very picky and choosy with my games, and it was a franchise I wasn't familiar with, even though it looked pretty cool. So that's why I never played Persona 3, 4, kind of a similar case, still was underage, still couldn't get into it, limited money, and by the time that Persona 4 came out, I was already pretty deep into 360, by then playing Halo, and playing all the modern stuff like Gears and everything like that, Viva Pinata, all that good stuff right there. But I did watch someone else play Persona 4, which was Giant Bomb with Vinny Caravel and Jeff Gerstmann, and it was a fantastic playthrough of the game. Two very funny people playing a very good game, and it just kind of made really great watchable content. And I kind of loved Persona 4 just by watching them play it. And I will say I have a different experience playing Persona 4 than I did watching them. But I think a lot of it has to do is by the time I got to 4, I had already played 5, so there's a lot of time there. And maybe it doesn't have the same impact having played the latest and greatest title. So that kind of covers my vital bits of history of the game here. Now let's, again, get back into Persona 5 in earnest there. Persona 5. Released 2017, the year that this is being recorded. Earlier in the year, about the first half of the year, if I was smart, I would have dates and stuff, but I don't, and it honestly doesn't matter very much. Persona 5 is a lot of development title. It took forever to come out, delayed multiple times, had a lot of development trouble, developing an engine and everything. Kind of in between 4 and 5, there was a lot of Persona 4 spin-off games, Persona 4 Golden, which was a remix edition, director's cut for the Vita, essentially, and also Catherine, which was kind of built as them trying to test out the developing an engine and be able to test out new engine stuff. I think Gamebryo was being used for the Bethesda shit. And they were trying to get used to next-gen software because Persona 5 at the time was rumored to be a PS3, Xbox 360 game. By the time everything got announced and everything, it only became a PS3 game, and then later got a PS4 as it got delayed several years in a row. So a kind of a troubled, rocky history, while like Persona 3 did take a long time to make, but Persona 4 came out pretty quickly after that, and I think that will actually speak to a lot of the production quality between those two games. But Persona 5 finally came out, and it was fantastic. It's brilliant. It's about the fan of, you play as your main protagonist character. There's official names or something, or like Magna or like anime names for the main character, but he's the main character for me, and it's easier to talk about all these characters as just the main character instead of going by their weird like names that don't ever show up in the actual game themselves. He is convicted of a crime that he may or may not have committed. Gets set on probation, lives with a foster parent, essentially, someone who takes him in and promises to look after him, and goes to school, and then kind of stumbles into a supernatural world where he can affect the emotions and change the hearts of those people around him who have grand delusions of the world, and kind of have evil and dark intentions, which are reflected in distortions that you kind of can explore. You get a gain of phantom thieves, friends who also share your goals of trying to make society a better place, and you go on this grand adventure. Now, that's kind of the overview of Persona 5. It's a JRPG, of course. All of these will be turn-based strategy, and let's go a little bit deeper into the plot here of Persona 5. So the biggest thing, again, there will be spoiler sections, but this video has to be a somewhat reasonably length, so it's not going to be like super in depth at every single plot point. But talking about the plot specifically of Persona 5, it's a really interesting game, as there's a lot. It's a very linear game in terms of how the plot progresses and how much influence you have over the story. But the big things, there's a lot of really compelling plot stuff, and I think kind of the big thing for Persona 5, and I think that's unique to the Persona franchise, is how it relates to real world. I think why the Persona franchise is so popular is that it gives it's like a modern day RPG that has its magical crazy elements, but also has like school life elements that people are really fond of and are really interested in exploring and reliving. Genres like an anime genre of like returning to school, going back to school, following the lives of students is very popular in anime, with like real life and stuff like that. I think I'm getting that right. It's a very popular genre. And Persona franchise types into that, and I think Persona 5 does an even better job with this, because not only does it have all that school stuff, but it has an actual point to the story, where even most games, Persona or otherwise, don't really. A lot of it has to deal with resistance from like the base generation of kids growing up or kids coming into this world, finding an oppressive pre-existing system of adults who are in charge, who are manipulating and take advantage of not only kids but each other. And Persona 5 has this really interesting message and story behind all this, and it's a really important thematic element because it's a video game with something to say about real life. Now, this is, again, it's a game based in Japan. The game came out, and most of the story was probably written by the time all this happened. But playing through this game while also like kind of living through the Donald Trump administration, like it really affected me in terms of just like how to resist this, how to stand up against oppression and fascism and evil and all this horrible fucking shit. And Persona 5 does a really good job of bringing all that stuff up while also having a really great plot with a bunch of plot twists, a bunch of character reveals, and the plot twists are meaningful, and some of the character stuff that happens is really important as well. Everything from the ego reveal, which kind of transitions you into the last dungeon of the game, to the Keshi stuff, where you figure out kind of his true motivations and where you kind of see him kind of redeem himself in some way. Maybe not a major way or as important ways he deserves, but in a way. It's a fascinating plot that doesn't always get where it needs to be. A lot of the problems that can be summed up the game, which I'm talking for, is translation stuff. It's been a really important issue where either the script is like clunky and stiff, or the plot of or the translation's bad. I will say that I have no idea about translation. I think a lot of people are speaking out of their ass a little bit, and even people who have qualifications aren't making compelling arguments or don't have the best background to really evaluate this stuff, or don't have the best like track record themselves to really evaluate this stuff. But I will say that in the end, whatever excuse you want to make or evidence you want to bring to the table, Persona 5 does have a clunky writing, and it has really drawn out writing where it could probably be more effective if it took more liberties and had more faith in this audience to kind of perceive what's happening. There's kind of a good example of this where your main character kind of fakes his death by the hand of Akechi, and it's a very complicated scenario afterwards where basically it's like 30 minutes of them explaining everything that happened, going through flashbacks, like, oh, this is how this happened, this is why he didn't die. It's a really cool like plot twist where it's very complicated, it's very heisty in nature, which ties very well into the main like themes of the game, but it's not very elegant. And I think that's a big thing about Persona 5 is that its plot's really interesting and great, and most of it is pretty elegant, but there are clunker parts. There are stiff moments where it's not as smooth as you'd like it to be. But taking all that into consideration, I love the main plot line. I love the main thematic elements about oppression and resistance and kind of overthrowing corrupt in place and established systems. Again, it doesn't have to do much with America. It's Japanese game based in Japan, but I found a lot of relation to it and still do, honestly, in my day-to-day life, trying to kind of come in contact with people who are siding with the kind of evil empire bullshit of America society right now. Another big thing about the plot is that, and another thematic element is that it's, as other Persona games, it's interested in a certain genre, and this is more of a hasty kind of noir-y thing. This is reflected in everything from its plot, characters, music, production, gameplay, all of this stuff. It's not worth digging into, and it'll be something I'll be discussing each individual element, but the big thing is stealing people's hearts, invading their treasures, setting up elaborate calling cards and elaborate traps, and even like that previous plot point we discussed about the main character faking his death. It feels very like almost Ocean's 11 or something, where it's this very complicated setup. You kind of see it, and then it goes back in reverse and kind of talks about like, oh, this is how it happens. Not saying necessarily that that's exactly what Ocean's 11 is, but it's a very similar thing where it's this very complicated scenario that this game builds a lot around, and then has a really big payoff at the end to kind of justify all this stuff. It's a great plot. Great character. It's probably one of the best works of young adult fiction in a game, or magical realism in a video game ever, with other stuff like, I think Undertale was a very good example of a great young adult narrative where it's about younger characters interacting with each other and trying to fix things. It's almost Harry Potter-esque with a super team of people getting together, much bigger than Harry's core trio of people, but with like way better characters and a way better storyline and plot, and also gets done in one thing instead of 10,000 different books. But that's kind of the main plot of Persona 5, and I think a lot of the meat of how it gets all this done is through its characters. It's a character specific story where the characters move things forward instead of the plot saying, oh, it's time to go to the next thing. One of the things I do want to talk about before is a lot of people have the problem with the last third or so, the last dungeon of Persona 5, because it feels like it's added content. It doesn't need to be answered. I don't think that's true. If the game ended just when you beat Shiro, I believe his name was. It's been a while since I played this game, but I believe that's it. It's the name. The president or the prime minister, whatever, of Japan, who gets elected, is kind of this evil figurehead that's kind of an exemplary figure of all the evil and hate and terrible things that Japan thieves have fought up to this point. Sorry about I should have talked about this in the beginning, but I do have a cold, so it's if you get hear sniffles and stuff, I do apologize about this. If the game just ended after you defeat that, it just doesn't fit. It doesn't satisfy very well. And I think the game comes together in a really incredible way in the last third. And sure, there are too many floors, or too many random battles beforehand, and too much backtracking to heal or whatever. But they want you to be able to grind in case you're not at the right level, so it makes sense. But I think the game really needs that final kind of supernatural act that all the Persona games kind of have, which I'll again talk about later in individual games. But Persona 5 has this big magical realism ending with a supernatural boss at the end, which kind of wraps everything together super nicely and super tidy. Has a great epilogue part, basically, where it doesn't take place after the year time frame of the game, but after that boss battle ends, which is basically, I think it's Christmas, or the day before Christmas, is when all this wraps up. It has a great epilogue part where it kind of wraps everything together really well. And honestly, by the time Persona 5 is all finished, I don't really need to see these characters again. By the time I finished Persona 5, I was very much done with the plot and the characters, but we'll talk about why specifically when I kind of go to a part where it all comes together, because that helps build everything up. Now, let's get to the characters. I think Persona 5 has the most diverse set of characters in a Persona game yet, but also maybe one of the least diverse. What I'll be talking about specifically is that I think Persona 4 Golden has a bigger cast. It has a similar sized cast, but some of the characters have some issues that they're trying to struggle with: gender identity and sexual identification. And I think that stuff is mostly completely absent for any of the characters in Persona 5. They're not really dealing with too many like personal stuff like that. But they do have a lot of problems. They have to do a lot of adversity that they're facing, which ties into the resistance and the uprising part of Persona 5, its thematic element. Each character has a very interesting backstory. They have a very interesting setup to each other and connection to each other, and by the end it kind of feels almost like a Fast and Furious family, that they all really care about each other. They all feel very loyal to each other. They'll be friends for a long time afterwards, and that they'll constantly be looking out for each other. I think it's a great cast of characters. I know there will be some criticism of Morgana, or Hafu. Almost forgot her name, because that's how forgettable she is, unfortunately. But Hafu, or Haru, it's Haru, sorry. But I don't think those are necessarily completely the character's fault. By the time I finished Persona 5, I did not develop any social link with Haru. She comes way too late in the game, so it doesn't really do her a correct service. Honestly, the game does a poor job of servicing her character. And Morgana, because all the memes and everything with, oh, time to go to bed, oh, you go to sleep, it sucks, stop doing these things. So and it's an animal, like a mascot character, and like Teddy's face criticism and such like that as well, so it's totally understandable. But by the end of things, I think everyone just has a really important piece to play. They build up the rest of the thematic elements really well. Let's dive into some of these here. I wish I had a character list right in front of me, because it's kind of difficult. This Wikipedia page is bad. I hate this Shimigami Wikia thing. Sorry to go on this weird tangent, but just kind of setting up things because I did not correctly set things up beforehand. Again, quality of videos a little suspect at best, but got a lot of interesting things to say still. Ryuji, that's like Ryuji kind of expresses like kind of the more masculine side of oppression, like what a man should be. How tough he is, kind of how of an all-star player he is, his connection to his mother and not having a father really, and what the horrible things a father did, kind of a male growing up without a father figure, and really dives into like finding her purpose and finding a goal in life, even though she has this natural talent of being a great model and having these really photogenic looks. She just has no passion for anything she does, and I think that speaks to a lot of people I even meet to on a daily basis who just are directionless and have no passion for anything. Morgana has a great kind of storyline that evolves around her identity and self-awareness and what her place in the world is as well. Yusuke, a person who has talent and has passion but can't really direct that or organize it in a way that's helpful for everybody, or especially himself, where it's like, oh, he clearly has talent and he clearly wants to try, but emotionally he just doesn't get it. And so kind of his journey of trying to understand how the real world works and how real people talk to each other, because otherwise if he doesn't have that connection, then it doesn't do anyone any good. Everyone's gonna see his art and be like, yeah, it's a really good piece of art, but there's no emotion, no personality behind it. Makoto has a really interesting storyline of trying to follow her father's footsteps to figure out what her sense of justice is, and kind of her place in society as well in terms of someone who wants to protect it. Futaba has a really interesting storyline as well. I'm using interesting a lot, but they are really interesting storylines. Where she's kind of living with this PTSD of her mother being killed in front of her eyes and her mother being abusive to her near the end. At least that's how she initially remembers it, and kind of being a shut-in for her entire life and trying to re-enter society and trying to figure out what the good parts are to save. Haru is another one. Again, did not get too deep into her social link, but initially, problem with Haru again is that she's introduced really late in the story. It's not a total justification of it, but she I would have to go through the social link. So again, I'll probably do a much bigger single analysis video Persona 5 once I can get deep enough and play it multiple times, probably something like next year by that time, once I kind of get through all the games of 2017, which is a lot of them. But kind of figuring out how is she going to make her own mark on the world after her father dies and she gains control all this money and all this power and all this influence, and what good she can do with that. Goro Akechi, one of the more interesting ones, because he actually is a villain, an antagonist who is your party member. You fight him in a pretty dramatic conclusion, and he sacrifices himself after realizing kind of like his weakness, which is he's someone who suffered abuse, he's someone who didn't have a father growing up, kind of similar to Ryuji almost, or a family, and was an orphan, and kind of his struggles through life, being abused and being kind of like shuffled around and being ignored and no one really giving a shit about him, and you're kind of his antithesis almost, where it's like you found friends, you found people that care for you, even like your darkest hour, there's always people around you, and you were able to reach out and connect with people through social links in terms of a mechanical sense, but also with your direct relationships in a story sense. Akechi's a really interesting character in that I really wanted to get to know him more, and I think the game does a little bit of a disservice to him, making him like a main story social link. I do hope if there's Persona 5 Remix that he gets a proper social link and proper interactions, and maybe he doesn't die at the end, or there's an extra campaign bit where you have to save him from the shadow world, or the in a distortion of his own after he maybe goes into a coma or something. Because I feel like sacrificing himself is a generic way of saying, oh yeah, now he's good now, but he's a very disturbed, very conflicted character, and I'd rather he have more time to either redeem himself or come to terms with what he does and try to figure out how to make good on that if he even wants to, which the end of Persona 5 kind of suggests he does want to. So I do think Goro Akechi gets kind of a short end of the stick. But I do think that what is there is really interesting and does a really good job of setting up this kind of tragic villain character. Because you need something like that, because Shido is the guy who's just kind of a gigantic asshole. Some other characters kind of mentioned supporting cast. Igor, I love how they kind of like justify his like really deep voice. And I think his kind of like guidance throughout the game makes a lot of sense by the plot twist. Caroline and Justine stuff, I didn't really care about their characters too much because they were so like strict and like prison guardy and like too like, I don't know, too like they're too much part of the system, and it didn't really feel like they have much of a personality outside of that. Oh, Sergiro is a fascinating character and one of the best characters in Persona 5, because I started out really disliking him because he's such a dick. constantly just a constant asshole to everybody, but he, by the end of the game, becomes like a fascinating, really respectable, awesome character, and the best dad figure in Persona game, because he has his faults and he has his issues, but by the end he really connects with you, and you really connect with him. At least I did. I maxed out his social link as soon as possible. Really great social link character. And Sei Nijima, Makoto's sister, who's kind of this public prosecutor who wants to kind of get the Phantom Thieves all locked away. She's another one where I feel like her plot is a little thrown away. I'd rather have more of a proper social link with her instead of the story-based stuff, but that would be weird for the setup of the game. I don't want a relationship thing, because the game already has enough weird kid to adult relationship stuff that's really confusing and hard to navigate. But she's probably fine enough as is. Like, I wouldn't want it too much deeper than it is already. Maybe some more meaningful dialogue so you can kind of get a better understanding of where she stands or what her sense of justice is. Because it just sounds like by the end she's kind of like a shittier version of Makoto. She's like Makoto in the future who gets really like really disenfranchised with the system and just only cares about winning, essentially, and doesn't really care about like getting actual justice. The biggest problem with this game is that with these characters, that none of them have like any. They're great conflicts and they have meaningful problems, and they do a good job where the social links are deep and have clear resolutions where the characters try to make things better or realize something about themselves. They don't resign to their fate. They keep trying to press through it. But I think the biggest problem with them is that it'd be interesting to talk about more social issues that are kind of affecting people nowadays, in terms of like whether it be global warming or equal rights, or women still not having quite equal rights, or even race issues, or any of this other stuff, gender identification issues, sexual issues. For a game that lets you romance people, like, there's very little like direct like sexual stuff for you to deal with. The closest is some stuff from Makoto, which kind of resolves in some fun, interesting ways, but not profoundly deep or interesting compared to what it could have been. And I hope they try to explore that more in future Persona games. I think they might have got turned off a little bit by it in Persona 4, because there are characters like that are affected, and they handle that stuff so terribly that I'd rather them not just include it instead of trying and then like being complete garbage at it and like almost being offensive in its execution. But that's enough for the characters for now. Let's get into the gameplay. Pretty typical turn-based strategy, kind of fair. But I think what Persona 5 does a really good job that most RPGs, actually, especially JRPGs, just can't figure out, is that if you're going to have this repetitive combat system that's turn-based, make it fast. Make it really really fast. And the menus do a good job of like, alright, everything's like a button push away, 2 button push, 3 button push, but like really quick to instigate. There's a rhythm to it in terms of like how you kind of go along with the music's really intense, and you can kind of like play along with the music, almost like a rhythm game. And especially the ways you can like take advantage and abuse weaknesses for characters, and then do fall all in attacks to completely eliminate them. They do a really good job of speeding things up and making things fast so you can get through it. It's because there's a lot of random battles, there's a lot of grinding potentially, and there's a lot of fights in general. So making that stuff sped up and fast is really good. I'm not going to talk too much mechanically about like the combat stuff, because I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I do like the interrogation stuff, even though I wish there was more of that interactions, because it feels like it starts repeating scenarios, and there's different answers for the same scenario, which is a little weird. And I think some like trying to figure out personalities of creatures doesn't make much sense. Even though you can kind of get, the game does kind of tell you like, oh, if a character's like this, then these answers are probably better for it. It just feels cheap and kind of lame. The part that's more important to me is the social link stuff, and I think the social link stuff in this game is brilliant, which is the confidant stuff, where you form these relationships with people, and then at certain thresholds they will give you in-game abilities that help not only your combat stuff or your dungeon crawling stuff, but also your in-game stuff, so you can study more, or you can like do sometimes randomly get an ability to in a certain class of somebody do some more reading or something like that. And I think this stuff is the most important stuff, because it ties everything together. It ties the design of the game all together, where it is this very, very, very important kind of cycle where it's like, all right, the things you're doing in the real world that isn't directly like buying swords or moving the main story forward does have an impact, and means like one person's game can be completely different than another person's game, and the choices you make do have actual gameplay ramifications. I'm a big proponent of fiction having gameplay and mechanical connections with the actual like game itself and the way you interact with it, instead of just like, oh, here's the story parts and here's the game parts, or here's the friendship parts and here's the dungeon crawling parts. Tying that all together is extremely important. The abilities, some of the abilities you get are straight up ridiculous and really strong and broken, and it makes the game really fun to exploit stuff like that because it feels like you earned it. And I think that ties directly to the structure and design of the game, where I think it kind of gets everything right in terms of how things are set up. You have this overarching kind of like story-based dungeons to go through, which have their unique set designs, but also you can go and you hang out with people if you want to, hang out at nighttime where only certain characters are available or certain shops are open, where you can also go into the oh, sorry, I hit my microphone there. There's certain dungeons and certain environments where you can go in and, you know, the I forget what the name of it is. It's basically the repetitive dungeon parts. Let's see, mementos. There we go. Where you can go in and kind of do some traditional Persona grinding stuff, and so it kind of has everything for everyone. And everything flows into each other really well, and you always have something to do. And I think design-wise, like, there's the most stuff to do in a Persona game here in Persona 5. So, like, even by the end of it, I didn't feel like I maxed out everything I wanted to do, and there's still way more things I want to do. And that's why I'm really happy to pursue a New Game Plus, where other Persona games may not have had that. Now let's talk about some bad bits about Persona 5. Honestly, there's not that much. I think the biggest and hardest thing is that it's very linear, very story based. So like there'll be moments where God will tell you to go to sleep a lot. So even for my New Game Plus, being so close to after I finished Persona 5, with the stories and characters and writing still fresh in my mind, makes it hard to go through it again because it can feel like a very linear, very on rails kind of game at times, where it feels like you're just buttoning through things until you can get to the parts where it's like, oh, here are the social choices I get to make, here are the characters I get to hang out with, here's the romance options I want to pursue, here are the fights and here are the personas I want to make those fights, and the items I want to buy. And I think Persona 5 is probably worse than any of its compatriots in that way, where it takes a really long time to get anything done. Not anything done, but to get to the interactive parts, I suppose, apart from hitting X to move the dialogue forward. And I think that'll be a big problem with Persona 5 going forward, just for replayability, where people have already finished it and want to keep playing it over and over again. I think for most people. Some people are giving you die-hard fans and will be able to go in and just kind of keep absorbing the story or get new nuances, which I definitely want to do. But it's kind of hard initially to go back and play through all that stuff again. But really, apart from that, Persona 5 is a fantastic game, and like the bad bits, there's not that many, honestly. Everything from the art style, the crazy, ridiculous art style, which I love a lot, the liberal use of red, which they do really well for the art style of the game, and the production, and even the menus is really great. Everything in this game pops really well, and the music is very more jazzy, more noir-y, where it's very smoky, mysterious, and almost sexual, just in terms of the energy it tries to, the hot kind of very classy, very smooth imagery it tries to bring up, and I think all this ties together with it seems very well. And I think by the end of the day, the game, what Persona 5 to me is, it's a game that matters. It's a game where everything you do matters, the events you do in the game matter, and it does not only matter in terms of the Persona of the game, but it matters into like even my day-to-day life of saying, oh, this matters to me, and I'm learning things, a new perspective on the world from these characters and from these plot lines and from even hanging out with these characters' social links. And I think that's a very important thing for any video game. That's like my game of the year back in, I think, 2014, 2015, Undertale. Undertale just felt important, and it felt like a game that had something important to say, and it felt important playing it. And I think Persona 5 has that, where most games, even though the Persona games don't necessarily have that. So how kind of it all comes together is a fantastic, brilliant fucking game. It has great gameplay, great design, and great structure to all of its elements. A fantastic plot with meaningful arcs and meaningful characters that by the end of it, it felt like kind of closing a book on a really good novel where, you know, I was emotionally drained. I had to immediately go to bed right after. It took me about 80-90 hours to finish the game. There's a picture on YouTube with, picture on my Twitter account, Cinder Spacer, with my final hour count for the game. I was just completely fucking out of it. I was completely drained. And I was just like, it felt so satisfying to close the book on Persona 5. And I think it does a better job than most other games with just kind of wrapping everything up. I don't need Persona 5 2. I don't need Persona 5 main character returns or Akechi returns or anything like that. It's not necessary. It's over. The important things Persona 5 has to say have been said, and we can all move on to the next thing. But we're talking about Persona games, so I'd be remiss to not then talk about the last category here, Best Girl. Or waifu character, because, you know, it's a fun topic, and it's a serious analysis video that it's nice to have kind of these goofy moments. I'll talk about this for each of the Persona games, but Best Girl definitely for me is Makoto, because not only is the character that I have the most attachment to, and would probably date in real life if I could, and it kind of has elements that I find really appealing in a partner. Specifically, she just has a really interesting storyline. She has really interesting challenges she has to face, and I think the game does push her pretty heavily onto the main character as the main or canon choice, which doesn't really matter because you can make all these different choices. It does feel like the storyline propels you that direction, especially since you interact with her sister so much as well. So if she feels like a second command, so she feels like your equal or close partner, so it makes sense. It just makes sense for the character. It makes sense for me as the player. It was a choice I would make if I were in real life doing this shit. And yeah, Best Girl. And I think though most other choices in this game are pretty good, I will say that I think there's an alarming amount of adult characters he could romance, but whatever, I guess. The only option I think is weird is Futaba, because she's super young and she's like really, I don't know, she's like really cringy, just the way she's like, oh, here's the choice for gamers. She makes Pokemon references. It's a RPG critical hit. A wild Yusuke appears, blah blah blah. She's cringy as fuck. They tied into her personality really well. But I don't know, it's like trying to romance Nanato, like a slightly older Nanato. It's kind of weird and creepy. And Sojiro yells at you if you do it, and I think he's right, so don't do that. And it's good. Haru, need to learn more about her character. You need to do her social link. Some of the adults are weird, especially the teacher is really weird, but I like the doctor. And the Shogu girl, who I think apparently was supposed to be a main party member, which makes a lot of sense because her character model is really detailed and like indicative of like what you expect a party member to look like in a Persona game. And she's a great choice. There's just great choices all around. And I wish there was ability to romance some of the male characters, because I don't know, why not? Just let the player choose. Who cares? Like, they're not real characters. They're really well realized and everything, but just let them do it. It's fine. Who cares? Get over yourself, Atlas. An audience, I guess, who have very powerful feelings about this. The only feeling I have about it is why not just do it? It's a fantasy. Let everyone live out the fantasy they want. Even though I wouldn't romance any of the males, because I just don't. That's not how I work as a person. And that kind of wraps up everything about Persona 5. Damn, that was fucking long. But let's get through the other stuff, because I think these games get easier to talk about the further past you go through it. Specifically because they are built upon each other in really obvious ways. So let's get into it. Persona 4 Golden. Again, not the regular edition of Persona 4, but the Golden version. So it does have more features tacked onto it and everything. Persona 4 kind of has a student who is visiting his extended family. I believe it's his uncle specifically. This is where I delay while I get Persona 4 pulled up, so I can make sure I get character names right, or at least as right as I can. Persona 4. because I'm really bad at setting this up and thinking ahead. Here we go, Persona 4 Golden. Nope, that's just gameplay changes. I want Persona 4. Yeah, this is Uncle Dojima and his younger cousin Nanako, and he kind of attends high school there and kind of has friends, and he's there for a year while his parents are abroad, I believe, is the excuse there. Yep, working abroad. And kind of these murders start happening in town. This mysterious fog starts showing up in the town, and you kind of after mysteriously gain the ability to jump through TVs and explore the world in the TV, to go and try to save people and find out who the killer is. This is interesting juxtaposition with Persona 5, because Persona 5 is a very serious game, with something important to say, and has the theme of, like, you know, thievery and like heist movies and noir stuff, while Persona 4 is more of a detective or mystery thing, more Scooby-Doo-ish. I think there have been a lot of comparisons to like the Scooby game, Scooby-Doo, the Mystery Machine game in Persona 4, because the cast is a little more lighthearted and there's not as much grim stuff. There's some grim stuff. It's a Persona game, so there's always mature stuff. It's a YA, it's a young adult thing. But the stakes are low. The stakes aren't as high as in Persona 5. The characters don't really have that meaningful problems. Some of them are introduced, like especially Kanji and Kanji and Naoto, who is the Haru of this game, because she gets introduced too late, and thus they have to rush through her storyline stuff really quickly. Where they have issues with sexual identity and gender identification, and they kind of shrug their shoulders like, oh no, I'm fixed now, or oh no, I'm good, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I like women, I like men. And it just really feels unearned and throws away any work that they could have done to say anything interesting there. But that's an overview of the game real quick. I probably went off in weird directions with that, but let's go back to the plot a little bit. The plot doesn't really matter, which is strange for a game that's like mystery themed, because the plots were a mystery kind of investigation detective thing. A lot of the meat lies because it's all about the whodunit, and the whodunit's a lot less important to Persona 4. Not like they're not trying to figure out who the murderer is, but because you save so many people and so many people live in the end, that would have otherwise, and kind of all the hijinks your characters go through and how lighthearted they are, that the plot actually doesn't really matter. And by the time you get to the point where it's like, all right, here, let's figure out who actually killed them, who was Adachi, Toru Adachi, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, who is the assistant of your Uncle Dojima, as kind of, he is a police detective. Dojima is a police detective, so Adachi is a cop who's killing people. He's a serial killer, which is not really explored in any meaningful way. None of the themes in this game, if there are any meaningful themes, aren't explored very well or very deep, because it's just kind of this fun, goofy little pop adventure. You can tell everything from the menus, the bright yellow, the more poppy music, and the soundtrack, that thematically Persona 4 doesn't have a lot going on. It's a lot more lighthearted, a lot more just fun. It's fun characters having a fun time solving murders, even though, you know, like, murders are happening. It's not really that grim dark. It's not that crazy. It's not that weird. It's not Persona 5, even though not a lot of people die. It's very grim. It has a very dour outlook on things and explores those in really interesting ways. While Persona 4 is just much more in the fun moment. It's more fun just, you know, let's explore this stuff. This is fun just doing this with your best friends. So there's not really too much to talk about for the plot, except we did talk about for Persona 5 a little bit, but kind of the last third of Persona 4's end game is kind of like, oh, here's the mystery thing where you kind of realize about who's really behind everything. And this is one where it felt bad, because not only did I not super care about Adachi as the main serial killer, but I didn't really care about the supernatural goddess who gave all of the powers to everything. It's kind of a cute little like plot twist moment, but especially the dungeon's too long at the end, and the boss fight sucks. So it's just like, it just doesn't tie together very well. It doesn't tie the plot together nearly as well Persona 5's does. So the criticism now, like, oh, Persona 5 goes on too long. Persona 4 goes on far too long, especially for the golden stuff where you kind of interact with Marie, who is a bad fan service character. Even though she has some interesting stuff, she's just shitty and sucks and reads her terrible poetry, which is terrible and bad. which isn't her fault, but it just played more for like laughs or like meaningful story development where it doesn't really matter at all. So at the end, like, Persona 4's plot, not great, but not really trying too hard. It's more about the characters. And I think this is where Persona 4 Golden, even though I like the cast of Persona 5 more, I think Persona 4's cast will appeal to a lot more people because they're a lot more lighthearted. They're having a lot of fun. They're just doing a bunch of goofy teenager shit. They're acting like kids, doing kid stuff, doing fun poppy kid stuff, doing fun investigation stuff, but also just fun hanging out, camping trips, and cross-dressing, hanging out at hotels and stuff like that. Just like kid stuff, like let's go to the beach and do beach day, yay, beach stuff. I think they're not characters with a lot of emotional problems, and oops, my headphones came off, which isn't a big deal because it doesn't matter what I hear, but I just like to have it just in case anything goes wrong. I need to hear like a Windows oops, something died sound. The most distressing thing about the characters in this game is that whether it's Yukiko having like turmoil about, oh, I don't want to just follow my parents' footsteps owning this famous hotel, or Yosuke, I don't want to be, my dad owns this really like basically the Walmart of Japan, Junes, a department store, and I gaining a lot of shit for it, and I don't really want to do that anymore. Kanji exploring sexuality and everything like that. The problem is all these Rise, where it's like, I don't want to live I don't want to be an idol anymore. I just want to live a normal student life. Was at Persona 5, live an honest student life. So it's pretty equivalent there. All of the resolutions are just like, oh, I just accept my situation, and that's okay. Yukio's like, oh, I'm just gonna live in the inn and do my job my entire life. It's fine. I don't really care, whatever, issues aside, it's fine. Yosuke's like, oh, I'll just keep working at Junes, it's fine. The department store's great, it's fine. Maybe I'll run it one day, it's fine. Kanji's like, I don't really, I knit, that's fine, it's fine. I don't really have that many issues with sexual identification, even though I really do, but we're not going to confront that here, it's fine. Or Rise's like, no, I'm going to go back and be an idol because it's great and it's fine, everything's fine, it's fine. So it's just like, no one develops, no one changes, and worse yet, they just kind of settle for the situation they're in. They don't try to, even if by the end, Yukiko was like, alright, I'm going to run this end, but I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to do it this way. Instead, she's like, no, I'm just going to do it traditional. I'm just going to do it how everyone expects me to do it. And it's really disconcerting and really lame. Because you go through these social links and you want things to develop, and then characters just settle back into the groove. It feels like actually that you failed as a main character. And we'll see. The main character, Persona 5, is fantastic, very snarky, very likable, and probably the best main character in terms of personality in a Persona game. Persona 4's main character is bland and like just generally kind of likable. He's like the anime like harem anime person where it's like, oh, he's just generally kind of kind and kind of accepting and like not too confrontational, and just kind of goes along with everything. And I think that exemplifies a lot of my problems with Persona 4 story and characters, where they're just characters who go wrong, even though they have emotional turmoil. They don't really address it. They just kind of settle for what they have. And it's kind of a gross message, actually, where it's like, oh, it's like in my situation, oh, I'm just working this part-time job, recording these YouTube videos and I need to figure out how to get better, but it's fine. I'm just going to keep doing this, and maybe it'll get better, maybe not, but it's fine. I'll settle for it. It's okay. It's just, it's bad. There's no development, there's no conflict, there's an interesting conflict there, but there's no development, there's no real interesting resolution. Like, if your main character wasn't here, all these characters would go down the same path, and that's the biggest problem with the main character and all these social links in Persona 4, is that they don't go anywhere, and if you weren't there interacting with it, it'd probably all end up exactly the same. So that's a pretty big issue for a game where you are supposed to have some kind of influence over these characters, or at least influence in interacting with them, convincing them, or not even convincing them, but encouraging them to change and evolve and to spread your message across their heart. Yeah, it's just not very good. Gameplay wise, Persona 4 is very straightforward. Persona 4, and it's a combat game. what I dislike the most about it is that it plays it too straight to the chest. The social link stuff matters very little, apart from fusing personas, which, you know, whatever, you just fuse the next level ones. It doesn't really matter how much they level up, because you're going to be grinding anyway. There's a lot of random battles. It's pretty straightforward. There's good menus, though. Not as good as Persona 5, but lots of menus to dig through. And combat, you know, it's fine. If you're a fan of that Persona brand of combat, then it's alright. It's totally okay. But it's pretty straightforward, pretty trite. Not too crazy, but it's fun enough, you know. Knocking people down, finding their weaknesses, casting abilities on your, healing your party members up, getting them new equipment. All that's good and fine, and it feels good, and it's fun to do, but it's not especially compelling or interesting. Even by the end of the game, during that final dungeon, I was just walking past every enemy encounter because I was so fucking tired of that shit, of just doing these lame battles that don't mean anything, and I had no interest in engaging, which was I didn't do a single time Persona 5, because every battle felt fun, engaging, and exciting, and meaningful. And that's why and the social link stuff, unlike Persona 5, basic, just here's a level. It doesn't have any real ramifications apart from getting Persona levels, and so it feels underdeveloped, and even the social links, just in terms of progression, feel underdeveloped as well. Whereas in like Persona 5, in Persona 4, 3 or 4 scenes in a single social link thing are one scene in Persona 5, as in Persona 5 ones cover way more ground, there's way more development than anything in the Persona 4 stuff. But for production, music and stuff, I think this will be a favorite for a lot of people, because the poppy music of Persona 4 is really catchy. It's a far different tone than the rest of the Persona series, 5 and 3 specifically, because those are the ones we'll be focusing on here. The graphics are very bright, very colorful, even for a Persona game, because they're more poppy and brightly colored and flamboyant, which is really fun, and it's really cool. I think that's just kind of Persona 4's thing, is that it's just kind of having a fun time with a fun set of characters who maybe aren't the deepest characters or have the most interesting conflicts or problems, but they're just fun people, and they're fun to hang around. You're doing fun things and battling monsters. You're doing fun stuff. But the problem with Persona 4 is it just doesn't have any teeth. It doesn't have that killer instinct. You can't tie any of this funness and make meaning out of it. It's just a fun thing, and I think a lot of people are gonna resonate more with Persona 4 than 5, maybe, in that case, even though I think 5's a far superior game in every single aspect we're talking about here. It's just gonna resonate with more people because it's a very different tone, and so that's why I think it's acceptable for people to think Persona 4 is better, even though I don't, because it has its unique tone, it has its unique production, it has its unique music that's very different than Persona 5, even though it's a similar structure. It's not exactly the same, and it just has its own unique identity. Which I think is cool, because I think these games should have unique identities. There's Persona 5 should just not be more poppy, yellow music, not yellow music, but yellow as in like the art style or like the thematic elements, or another mystery game. I think it's important for these games to have different identities and different thematic elements they're chasing. I guess Persona 4 just didn't do as much for me as 5's. And the bad bits are something I'm not going to focus too much on this section of the discussion, because specifically I feel like I kind of I go to the section of Persona 5 because I was very enthusiastic about this game, about Persona 5, so I need to make sure I kind of balance the discussion a little bit. But Persona 4, I think I've been talking about this enough that I can skip this section mostly, because this video is already very long, and I want to make sure I get to the other stuff here very quickly. Best girl. Obviously, this is a more contentious one. I think it's more contentious than Persona 5 because I feel like the game doesn't push any one character, apart from maybe resetting on you pretty hard. But also I don't think this is a hard choice because they're all kind of bland. I'm gonna be perfectly honest. It's the same thing where it's like these characters don't have very interesting conflicts or resolutions to the conflicts, so by the time you kind of wrap everything up with a character, you're just like, man, you're boring. You're just like, oh, you have this end, and it's cool that you're going against it, and maybe trying to make something of your life, and maybe like, oh, maybe you'll keep doing the end, but like on your own terms. But instead, you're like, nope, just gonna do this, and if you want to hang around here forever too, that's cool. It's dumb and it's bad, and I hate it. And I think that's the biggest problem with trying to pick a best girl character, is that it's like these characters just aren't that compelling or interesting. But like any of the female characters in Persona 5 are far more sophisticated, far more interesting and developed than anyone in Persona 4. But the one I romanced was Tsukiko, because I think she had more physical characteristics that I enjoyed more as a male, kind of what I'd be looking for. She was funny, kind of in a like a not intentional way, not intentional as in the developers for her poorly, but more as an unintentional that she didn't know she's being funny, and she really is. And I think that's a really cute and admirable trait in someone, when they're being funny, not really trying to, but they are. And it's kind of funny, and just how they kind of go about their lives, and her life's ridiculous, and that's a really funny thing. It's probably the most memorable character trait of anyone in Persona 4 that isn't like Kanji. It's like sexual identification, like the way he kind of goes and moves around life all embarrassingly, which is pretty disappointing. But I think Yukio's best girl. Chie, actually, she fits a similar place of like Futaba, where she feels very fan servicing, very kind of weird. She's a weird option. She feels like the best female friend option, not like the actual like dating option. Naoto, I think I maxed out her social link, but I just didn't. She just gets rushed too much. This is what happens in every Persona game, where they just rush it too much. They introduce a party member too late, and it doesn't matter. And I think Rise is really shallow. She's very attractive, but she's a very shallow character. It's kind of weird to have it saying a sentence like that, because these are high schoolers, but whatever, I guess. That kind of wraps up Persona 4. Still a really good game. I still like the characters a lot, even though there's not a lot of depth to them. I like the writing a lot, even though there's not a lot of depth to it. I like the music and the UI and the graphics and everything. I think it embraces its pop theme really well, and its mystery stuff is like Scooby-Doo mystery, lighthearted mystery stuff is fun enough to interact with. And I think that's an easier game actually than Persona 5, because it's very dramatic and very emotionally destabilizing, and a very conflicting game where it has something to say and will say it, and will maybe challenge your opinions on certain things. Persona 4 won't challenge you, and I think that's why more people might like Persona 4 more than 5, even though I think it's a quite like just like kind of narrowing things down, is the far superior game. Persona 4 is just a pleasant game with pleasant characters and a pleasant plot and pleasant JRPG traditional JRPG gameplay, and pleasant design structure, and pleasantly rewarding bits. It's a pleasant game, and I don't use to mean that as like a negative completely. Like, it's a very entertaining, relaxing game, which maybe other games in the series are far more challenging in terms of emotional shit going on. Sorry, I don't have a better word, and it's pretty late right now. But let's wrap this up a little bit with Persona 3 Portable. Well, actually, let's go back to Persona 4 Golden real quick. You can kind of see the roots of like Persona 5, them trying to figure out like emphasizing. Well, actually, it's a bad place for this, because I should say this all for the end, like I said I was going to. Not sticking with my script, that's why I should have it up on all times. Let's get the Persona 3 wiki page up, and let's kind of go over the summary of it. You are a new student. The main character is a new student. You're going to Tetsumi Port Island 10 years after your parents are killed from an accident, and so he's kind of a new transfer student, and he's hanging out there doing stuff, meeting with friends and everything, until he kind of stumbles upon this alternate dream reality where everyone around them are turned into coffins, and except for certain people called C's, which is called Special Extracurricular Execution Squad, who's going around killing these monsters who are hunting these people during this dark hour, this kind of supernatural time where everyone's in coffins. And kind of getting down to what's going on here, what's the mystery here, and trying to solve that problem. Persona 3 is a very weird game, and I think everyone has their own favorite Persona game, and I think all three options are valid. I will say the further down the list we get, the less valid the argument stands to me. Because Persona 3 just feels weird. It definitely feels like the rough draft of the series, at least the modern incarnation of the series, which again, we're only focusing on the modern games of 5, 4, and 3. It just feels kind of all over the place a little bit. 4 has very clear, like more poppy, kind of lighthearted mystery Scooby-Doo game feel to it, and 5 has this very noir-y, heisty, very serious storyline that targets very specific things, which kind of all tie together in its gameplay, from its social link stuff and the characters you interact with and everything, to the conclusion and thematic explorations by the end. Persona 3 identity is really weird. The main color of it is blue compared to the red of 5 and the yellow of 3. I don't really know where Persona 3 is going for. In some ways it feels like a mystery game. In some ways it feels like a kind of Persona 3 detective game, but darker. Kind of having watched more anime and kind of getting back into it recently, Persona 3 feels like the most traditional anime of all of them, because it has this kind of grim atmosphere. It's very stylized, but like almost meaninglessly stylized. There's no real purpose or objective to all of it. I know people say, I know some people like Persona 3 more, is because plot-wise it has a lot more like big stuff going on. There's more end of the world craziness going on than like in 3, which is a lot more lighthearted, and stakes feel a lot smaller for the most part throughout the majority of the game. Where Persona 3 feels like from the get-go the world's gonna end, and the end is inevitable, and that is kind of one of the main thematic elements, is that death's inevitable. A big one is what? Memento Mori, remember you will die, remember your death. And Persona 3 handles it in a really strange way, where it's like, yeah, death's inevitable, like it's like creeping around the corner, your characters can get killed at any moment in battle. They're all orphans for the most part. I think the majority of them are orphans. And just, they have all this horrible things of death follows them everywhere. Death follows your main character around everywhere. But the problem with Persona 3 is it feels too anime. While 4 and 5 feel like they take place in a real world, Persona 3 feels like it takes place in a fake fictional world. Sure, it's Japan, but it's not. Is it really Japan? It's this weird fake island port thing that doesn't feel like a real place, and none of the locations feel real. And so it's hard to get a real connection with the environment, where I think Persona 5 excels at that, where you walk around this very well-realized version of Tokyo and Shibuya and everything. And Persona 4 handles this really good exploration of the outskirts, kind of the more, kind of the outlands a little bit of Japan, and like what are more non-city folk doing out in Japan, what's their vibes like. Persona 3 is this weird, like, it just doesn't make sense as a city. It doesn't make sense as like a town or a culture or anything. It just feels weird and it feels fake. It feels like GTA almost, where it's like, it's this weird like parody of itself. Not like intentional parody as GTA is, but like it just doesn't have a real place in the world. It doesn't have a real place in Japan. It doesn't feel genuine. Especially because of all this whole dark hour stuff, so the world just turns weird and like crazy, and like doesn't have a real connection to the rest of like what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And so kind of there's a lot of plot stuff, but a lot of it's really confusing, doesn't really make a lot of sense. I had to read a lot of Wikipedia stuff after I finished 3. I would need to reread it all again because I forgot most of it, about like characters' interactions when they meet, Tartarus stuff, what the dark hour actually is, the fall, the end of the world, the incarnation of death, the moon Nyx coming to kill everybody, how the main character defeats it, everything like that. It's very complicated, so I do understand why some people might prefer the plot of 3 to something like 4, though I don't have no way why you would like it more than 5, because there's more stuff going on, but most of it's bad and poorly explained. It feels more anime. It's kind of like, it just feels bad. It just doesn't feel right. But it does have its own specific elements. Like characters die or sacrifice themselves a lot, and like even one of your main characters in the game, who, I hate when JRPGs do this, because especially for like a grinding game like Persona 3 is, you can lose all the progress of that character because they will die, or you'll lose control of them. Final Fantasy 8 does that, where it takes away certain characters away from you by the end, which is really annoying. That'd be an interesting analysis with Final Fantasy 8, because that game is weird and very strange, and I kind of love it for how weird and strange it is. But the plot of Persona 3 just feels all over the place. There's no real emotional connection to anything, where I think Persona 5 has something meaningful to say about real world stuff that's happening right now. Persona 3 is way more abstract and strange and doesn't really explain itself very well. I guess that connects really well in terms of like, hey, death's this weird, strange, kind of terrifying thing that's inevitable, and you kind of have to learn to come to terms with that. I just think Persona 3 does a really poor and bad job developing on those themes. It might be something that's worth discussing in the comments, so please let me know and kind of explain your case a little bit, because I'd like to kind of figure out why people like this story more than 4, which I can see, but more than 5, I just don't get it. It falls apart completely for me at that point. Continuing on, I don't like any of the characters in these games because they feel like, well, and I think it kind of speaks into why going this franchise in reverse makes a lot of sense, because it feels like the characters and the stories and the plots and stuff gets worse game by game, because they feel more anime. They don't feel like real people. They're all this crazy robot lady and these religious cult people and like these girls who really don't like you, but for some reason you can romance them later on and it doesn't feel right, and your main character being kind of a dick to everybody, which is really strange. The only character I ended up liking by the end of all this, I guess, because she feels like a really interesting character, and she's a character of a new lease on life in a modern time, and she's a robot character trying to figure out how it is she wants to become human, if she does at all, what aspects of humanity she wants to incorporate into her identity. I'm a science fiction nerd. I took a lot of genre fiction classes when I was getting my creative writing degree. And so like consciousness stories or like studies of human consciousness and human awareness and human condition examinations through robots and stuff is really fascinating, like a classic kind of trope that I really enjoy, even though it's pretty used. It's pretty thoroughly used at this point. But I can't help it. I'm suckered into it and kind of skipping to the best girl part. I guess even though you can't really romance her correctly, because that stands out to me more, because everyone else feels like they have to like you for some reason. Because they feel like the romance options in 3 feel the least genuine of any romance options in the Persona franchise. But I really didn't like any of these characters for the most part. None of their issues really resonated with me. They're all very dire, and most of it's like, oh, my parents died, and like that's really important to a lot of these characters, and I just didn't really care. I didn't really care to explore all this stuff, especially since the social link stuff doesn't have real meaningful consequences apart from XP, which is kind of whatever. You can earn that other ways if you don't want to grind it out. I didn't really care about exploring that stuff, even though at some point you kind of have to, because there's not that much content in Persona 3. There are large periods of times where you're not doing anything, you're just going to bed every night, you don't have anything to study, your stats are fully maxed out, and that can happen pretty early in the game if it's something where you want to min-max it, which at this point, being the third Persona game I played, I had kind of method to my madness and how I wanted to progress my characters. And I would rush through the dungeons, I would make sure I do get through all the levels of the dungeon in one day and go through all that stuff, and I hate the randomized the procedurally generated stuff and like the kind of soulless nature of the Tartarus Tower, at least for the Persona 3 portable stuff, so maybe it's just an issue of the version of the game I played. But I didn't really care about the environment, I didn't care about any of the battle stuff or anything, because Persona 4 and 3 are very similar combat games. So I felt like I was just playing more Persona 4 combat, and by the time Persona 4, I was super done with the Persona combat system, at least in these kind of pre-Persona 5 games. And so by the time, I was just like super exhausted. I just wanted to blast through much of it and do the bare minimum that I had to do, because I was so tired with it. And that's probably one of the issues of blazing through these games in a row, in all in 1 month essentially. It's not probably not healthy. But I just don't think they earned it very well. Also, Persona 3 has the worst menus. I hate that revolver thing. It makes no sense. Nothing is organized how logically makes sense and how I want things to be right next to each other. It's just a bad menu. That kind of covers the gameplay side of it. Apart from the fact that, again, there's not that much content there. There's large periods where you're not doing anything, you're just sleeping, and there's not even characters to hang out with anymore, because you've done as many social links as you can, and you're just kind of waiting for the next story thing to happen, and you don't want to grind because that shit's boring as fuck. So you're going to bed every night. Fuck Tartarus. Persona 3 is it's lacking in content. The plot plot is loose. The plot doesn't feel well developed. It feels the most anime of everything, which I use as an insult generally because I think most anime is bad. Not that there isn't good stuff. There's fantastic shit. There's really artful stuff in anime, but most of it's not very good. It's kind of trashy. And the same way I view comic books as trashy, or TV shows as trashy as well compared to most films, or at least the art of films. Structure design pretty similar. Again, except with way less to do than even in Persona 4. Production, again, it's a weird game where it doesn't have a specific genre that's tackling. While like Persona 4 has this very lighthearted mystery thing, and Persona 5 is this noir heist thing. Like the music, like it has this very blue art style with like this hip hop music, there's hip hop elements of its Japanese J-pop music that just doesn't fit with anything else it's trying to do. It's like, oh, here's this game about death and about accepting death and kind of making the most of all your life if you can, but with no real genre focus. It's like, what genres can be? Oh, we're an execution murder squad who murders monsters and shit. Like, that's not an interesting, like, murder genre is not interesting. This shooting yourself in the head just doesn't make sense. It's weird, and it just feels more stylistic shots, like in something that has meaning in the thematic elements that wants to pursue. It just feels like edgy as fuck for no apparent reason, like without any real justification apart from, oh, this is how we summon our personas, and that's about as far as you get. Like, maybe you should develop a better way than like this really I mean, it's so stupid that characters don't even though they're told no, it doesn't kill you, they still get really nervous, and they're like, oh, this is gonna kill me, oh no. It's like, no, like, they told you it's not going to. You see other people do it. It's dumb, it's fucking stupid. And I can see what people will like. Again, I think I can understand why people like the music in Persona 3, because it is kind of its unique hip-hoppy pop thing that's very different than 4's more mainstream poppy, like Japanese pop music, or like Persona 5's more jazzy noir music, where it has a unique identity, but it just doesn't fit with the rest of the game very well. So like, I can understand why the soundtrack people like it more, and the way it's implemented in the game, I think both of the Persona games are far better in terms of that stuff. Again, skip the bad bit stuff because I think it's pretty self-evident. What I think about was bad about Persona 3 Portable, and skip the best girl part because I talked about Kat. Again, I guess she only feels like the most meaningful, the most interesting character who has actual shit they need to deal with and try to learn about themselves. And kind of putting all the pieces together, Persona 3 feels like a rough cut. It feels like the early draft of the Persona franchise. And same the way I think Demon Souls, it feels like the rough draft version of the Souls series. That'll be an interesting retrospective to do. The Souls series, Jesus, that'd be a long one. Persona 3 just feels like the first step. It feels like the first step into this genre, the first kind of for like a venture in to this new space of JRPG. And I think probably by the time, if you play Persona 3 during when it first came out, it'd probably be revolutionary. Like, it sounds like nothing else. The music sounds like nothing else that's out there. The story is like nothing else out there, even though it's not, like, comparing it to its compatriots at the time for when this game came out, 2006, 2007, game stories sucked back then. Like, really sucked. And like, there's especially JRPG games, which were nonsense anime bullshit. Persona 3 is some nonsense anime bullshit, but like slightly better quality than what surrounded it. I'd have to look at like other JRPGs it was like competing against. Let me do a quick search in JRPG 2007 and see maybe like what was the Final Fantasy game that came out then. Final Fantasy Dirge of Cerberus. A bunch of Final Fantasy ports and shit. Dragon Quest. Yeah, like it just doesn't have much competition. So like, even though I don't like Persona 3 very much historically, I can understand why people liked it a lot and why it was so revolutionary and why it has such high review scores and everything, is because for its time it was revolutionary. It felt like this brand new, very important thing, and it felt like a sea change for the JRPG genre. It didn't. But Persona 3 led to Persona 5, which is like a mainstream fucking success. People know the name Persona, and it feels well developed and it feels excellent because it's kind of developed its way back here. Touch upon the Persona 3 stuff real quick. I did not finish the 4 answer stuff or the answer stuff because I just didn't have access to that version of the game. I need to go probably watch the cutscenes for that because I just don't like. I didn't want to see someone playing more Persona 3 because the combat's really bland in that game. But like, apparently the main character dies in the end of Persona 3 like proper, but they don't talk about it at all really. So I think that's a really shitty thing, because main character dying at the end of Persona 3 makes a lot of sense for it. It's like, you will die, remember, make your death memorable, remember your death, you will die. And it's just a weird ending. It's like, oh, it's drift off into whiteness, and all your characters like, oh, he's sleeping, it's cool, it's fine, protecting him, yay. But he's actually fucking dead, which I think would be way more interesting if that was in the original game in a more explicit way, and kind of exploring the characters, like all of your like side characters, like feelings about that, which is explored in the answer apparently, but it's not Persona 3. It's not in the version of Persona 3 I played, so I'm not interested in talking about it. So that's all the Persona stuff. Persona 5, 4, and 3. Kind of wrapping it all up here, kind of ranking them together. I think you can rank them in that order for me at least. Because I do think they get progressively better. I think Persona 3 is kind of a fucking mess plot-wise, and so I think it's a mess in terms of its inspirations and its like uniting theme and identity and its music. But I think Persona 4 solves all of those issues, even though I don't think gameplay-wise, it's basically the same exact game. And structure for the most part is the same exact game. But I think they just kind of make that, like, the production stuff and the presentation stuff unifying, which I think makes Persona 4 better than Persona 3. And I think it has just a more likable cast of fun people, and it's a fun game with fun stuff going on in it. While Persona 5, it's still a fun game, but there's way more important, meaningful things it wants to say. It's unifying, like, production stuff are fucking, like, outstanding, and way more money has obviously been put into it, so it can shine really hard with incredible menus and incredible music and incredible, like, characters that really reflect the game's overarching theme of resistance and fighting oppression and righting the wrongs of society. And I think Persona 5, at the end of the day, is just a far more interesting, far better developed, far more cohesive, and far more important game than Persona 4 or 3. Maybe not the most important game for the Persona franchise, but in terms of putting one of these games out and saying this is the exemplar of not only the Persona franchise, but video games, Persona 5 is that video game for the RPG genre, I think. More so than even the Western stuff, like The Witcher, which is just another fucking Bethesda game, essentially. Another Bethesda open world game. Or like Skyrim or Fallout. Or any other Western thing. I think even like Dark Souls is kind of another one of those. It's like an exemplar of the JRPG, of the RPG, and not only just the RPG genre, but the video game industry and the video game art form. I wouldn't hesitate to recommend Persona 5 to anybody who don't traditionally play video games. I would not recommend 4 or 3 to any of them, because I don't think they have enough redeeming factors for a non-fan of the industry or non-fan of Persona to really approach them. I think they're generally pretty unapproachable, actually, by modern standards. I think Persona 5, even though it holds your hand more as more linear, it needs it. It's a very complicated game with a lot of complicated systems going on. But that might be a problem for diehard Persona fans. Persona 5 is fantastic. It's kind of the important outlier there, the important thing to kind of bring out. And I think going back and playing the previous one just got me more appreciation, not only for how good Persona 5 is, but how long it took to build up to it, refine the elements from the previous games, and seeing like, oh, here's this character that maybe kind of appears in some form in the future Persona game, Persona 5, but like way more developed and way more interesting, expanded upon far and more significantly. It's a fascinating series that is, even though at its worst, or at least interesting Persona 3, I'd rather play more than any other JRPG out there, because they're just way more generic and way more bullshit. And even though Persona 3 is kind of weird and random and wacky, it's still a far more interesting game than most JRPGs out there, even being made today. And that kind of takes us over to the future a little bit of the Persona franchise. kind of with 4, there seems to be a lot of spin-offs on the way. Some of them announced, which is Persona 5 Dancing Star Night, which normally I wouldn't play a game like that. I did not play the Persona 4 dancing game, for Persona 4 Dancing All Night, because I just don't care to explore that stuff. Even if it's canon, I just don't care. The story ends pretty satisfactory for the most part in Persona 4. But I will play the shit out of Dancing Star Night. I am worried if it is a canon story. It's hearing how they handled all that shit and how they kind of fucked up the canon storyline in Persona 4. I'm kind of worried they'll fuck up Persona 5. But even if so, I can just ignore it and just say, you know, that stuff didn't really. Atlas may say it happened. It didn't really happen. There's the rumored Arena game, which kind of, you know, Persona 4 had its fighting games, the Persona 4 Arena and Ultimax games, which it would make sense for Persona 5 to have those as well. I don't like fighting games, but because of how much I love Persona 5, I will definitely play it if it comes out. Also, speaking of the Persona franchise, there was a Dancing Moon Knight, which is a Persona 3 spin-off dancing game that comes out same time frame as Dancing Star Night, I believe, which is weird, especially where that story kind of ends. It'll be interesting to see if that has a story mode and where it's canonly takes place and how it kind of resolves that stuff, even though I don't really care. They can do whatever they want, because I don't really give a fuck about the main character or most of the characters apart from Aegis, so whatever. And then Persona 5, a remix. They've done a remix for Persona 3 with portable, not only portable, but also the answer, which could answer additional content, which is pretty important, it sounds like. And Persona 4 had Persona 4 Golden, which is pretty important in adding a lot of features. You can even see early stuff like, the dating system that Persona 5 uses, or like the traveling system and visiting these locations that don't really have a lot of going on, but are kind of fun, get fun character interactions out of it and stuff. And my conspiracy theory, I haven't done too much research into like what people are saying on Reddit or Twitter or whatever, or forums about what they think the remix is or what they've heard. Whether it's called After Golden, which would be a pretty good name if it had some Persona 4 Golden tie-ins, like maybe you get a new party member or you get a new social link, and maybe it's like Naoto but older or something. Like that'd be really interesting to see like an older version of her walking around Shibuya, or whether it's called Persona 5 Silver or whatever. I'd like to see expanded. There's just so much in Persona 5, it's kind of hard to ask what you would want expanded upon, but I would like an expanded, a catchy social link, and maybe like some stuff after he kind of sacrifices himself in quotation marks, so he can actually get a proper send-off or a proper development as a character, instead of just kind of killing him off and saying, yep, that's good enough, martyrdom's fun. Martyrdom solves everything. But my conspiracy theory for this one is that they'll port Persona 5 to the Switch. Because if you notice, for Persona 3 Portable or Persona 4 Golden, they are both console ports done on handheld. There's not a lot of handhelds that can support Persona 5. But the Switch is kind of a pseudo handheld, so that makes a lot of sense, I think. Especially since they're doing, exclusive Shin Megami Tensei game for the Switch anyway. So they already have the resources. They're already working with that engine probably on the Nintendo platform. So, and Persona 5 is the most successful, so it would make sense to port it. And so yeah, I'd like to see extended catchy stuff, maybe some guest characters from previous Persona games as social links, maybe the Shogu girl becomes a party member, they figured that out. Just more events and stuff like that, like maybe expand upon the Hawaii trip, or have other events like that, because those are fun. There's not a ton of them in Persona 5, because it's far more main story focused than like Persona 4 is. Persona 4 has a fuck ton of events and like fun goofy stuff the characters do, so maybe more of those would be always fine as well. But it feels such a complete game that I don't feel too bad if they don't really add that much stuff, or I don't really have too much wants or desires. Kind of the one thing I would say is I would like where if, especially since in Persona 5 they introduced this concept of like, your confidants give you new abilities and gameplay relevant stuff. It'd be nice that when you start a relationship for a character, you get 5 additional levels of a social link or something, so you can upgrade those and make more meaningful decisions. And maybe specialize in like, I'm level 15 with Makoto, and so I had to get these crazy new abilities that no other person will get because you can only romance one of these characters in these games. That would be really awesome. And I think it's like, but what about completionists? I don't give a fuck about completionists. I'm more interested in making more interesting choices that other people maybe can't make or won't make. And I think that fits in really well with how they're turning this franchise and kind of connecting all of the confident stuff with more actual meaningful gameplay stuff. Kind of thinking about other stuff here. Because the main reason why I want like additional social links, because by the time you romance a character, it feels like the story ends there with them, and I think that's really underdeveloped. I do think they do a better job in 5 because you can take them on dates and kind of get fun moments with them, but having meaningful story stuff would be more interesting, because it kind of goes from 100 to 0 really 0 to 100 really fast, where it's like you start a relationship and then by the time Valentine's Day comes around or Christmas, they're like, oh, I love you, and it's like, I feel like we missed some stuff along the way to get to this emotional crossroads here, and I just want more moments with these characters and with these partners to be able to like really bond with them and connect with them. And I guess I'll out myself here. I like Sword Art Online, even though I think it's kind of terrible and not very good. I think there's some cool stuff about it. I think one of the stuff it does really well is it predicts like a really interesting relationship, a really interesting romantic relationship that like goes past like, oh, the flirting phase, or like, oh, they get together phase, or oh, will they, won't they? And I think Persona 5 could take something like that. It's like, what happens after the will they, won't they thing, once they become an actual couple, the challenges they face with that, and being together and falling in love, and then actually like expressing their love to each other more than just like some sexual way, like actual meaningful way. I think that'd be really interesting. I think that should be the next step for the Persona franchise, especially since all this waifu shit, which again I took that a little bit. The best girl stuff was more of a jokey thing. I think that'd be a really smart move for them to kind of leverage all of that character stuff. And kind of closing things out here a little bit on the future, Persona 6, no idea when it's coming out, man. I think they have a perfect engine and art style for it. The game Persona 4 is going to age really well visually, just because of like how good it looks and how well they like, it's HD, so it's going to naturally just look good and stand the test of time far better than Persona 3 or 4 will. And because it's stylized art style and just how good it looks and how realized its art style is and how cohesive its thematic elements are with its production, I think they don't have to do much work with the engine or like revitalize the engine or anything for Persona 6. I think they can just like figure out a new storyline, new cast of characters, a new theme that they want to tackle and dive into it. I don't know what genre I'd like them to explore. They've done the noir, the heisty stuff. They've done the investigation mystery, like hearted poppy stuff. I don't know what I want them to do next. I just know I want more Persona. I want Persona 6 really bad, even though it probably won't be a while. It is good news, I guess, that they have a proper engine to work with now. They figured that out, and even though the director for the franchise has left, which is sad, he kind of leaves the franchise on a high. Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe you can get a director in there that will get shit done and keep that game out in 2 or 3 years, which would be my preference, and I hope this is what happens, because waiting for like 5 years or 6 years for a Persona game is dumb, and I'm glad I didn't have to wait for that. After playing 4, that I can now just be like, all right, give me a new Persona game, give me 6 and make it quick, because I want more of this incredible franchise. Again, even though I am kind of shit on Persona 3 and 4 a little bit, as I said before, still better than even a lot of JRPGs being made right now. It's an incredible franchise with a lot of history and a lot of importance, and I think Persona 5 will exemplify that, where I think it's going to win a good amount of Game of the Year awards for not only critics, but also people who are new to maybe JRPGs or new to video games, because of how strong this entry in the game is and how cohesive its elements, thematic elements, and production elements are. It kind of closes out. It's a really long video. It's a really long audio thing. So thank you, whether you watched me playing Persona 5 on my New Game Plus, this kind of shitty video part, or listening to this as a podcast form, which is longer than some of the podcasts we do. Gonna be a show now since we're done talking about Persona. My throat's hurting. Check me out at twitter.com/SounderSpacer. You can check out the website hiddenaudiolog.com or youtube.com/hiddenaudiolog. That's where you can find all the videos and stuff. I have another fun one if you probably will be a lot more better edited this and probably a lot more cohesive thought, because I kind of threw this together so I can get this done and hopefully I can learn a lot. So if you have any criticism of this or any suggestions or advice, please feel free to put that in the comments or send me a tweet at SenderSpacer so I can read that and kind of get better at this, because I have another series of videos kind of like this that I want to do, which is going to follow the modern Telltale games, where it's going to be about kind of ranking all of them and talking in each of the season's aspects and kind of their specialty. And so it's going to be pretty fun to do that stuff, because I have a soft spot in my heart for Telltale stuff. But again, thank you so much for everything. Again, it's SenderSpacer on Twitter, hiddenaudiolog.com, youtube.com/hiddenaudiolog. Thanks everyone for listening, watching, whatever you're doing, whatever way you're absorbing this. You have a great week. Bye-bye.